All right. Awesome. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that icebreaker. Feel free to type in any interesting classes you guys came up with. And I'll turn it over to our awesome education committee.
Okay, so today we're going to be doing a presentation on Huntington's, and we're actually going to be having the education committee presenting this presentation, which is super exciting. It's like the first thing that we're all working on together. So yeah, let's just get right into it then. Okay, so right off the bat, we have like a short video kind of explaining the biology behind Huntington's and everything. So you can get kind of like a visual kind of model as to what's going on. So let's play that.
Huntington's disease is a genetic, neurodegenerative, and ultimately fatal disease with devastating impact on individuals and entire families. Huntington's causes problems with a person's ability to think, behave, and move. Over time, the disease causes progressive functional decline, leading to a loss of independence and the ability to perform daily activities. Huntington's typically strikes a person in the prime of their life, between the ages of 30 and 50, although symptoms may appear earlier or later. Today, clinical diagnosis is made when movement problems are obvious. However, subtle changes known as prodromal or premotor onset symptoms often appear years earlier. Each child of a parent with Huntington's has a 50% chance of inheriting the disease, which affects men and women equally. We call this pattern of inheritance autosomal dominant. About 1 in 10,000 people live with Huntington's today, with many more at risk, including over 30 individuals within my own family. Everyone has 2 copies of the Huntington gene, which contains a section of repeated genetic letters known as CAG repeats. The Huntington protein is produced throughout the body, and although the normal function is not yet fully understood, it is thought to be involved in many biological functions, including the development of the nervous system. Huntington's disease occurs when 1 copy of the Huntington gene has a CAG repeat expansion over a certain threshold. People with 40 or more CAG repeats will develop Huntington's in their lifetime. People with 36 to 39 repeats may or may not develop the disease within an average lifespan. And those with 27 to 35 CAGs will not develop Huntington's themselves, but risk passing on the disease to the next generation. The Huntington gene carries instructions to make the Huntington protein. The DNA is used to create a messenger RNA that carries the code to the cellular factory that makes the protein. Too many CAG repeats result in a toxic form of the protein being produced, known as mutant Huntington protein. Mutant Huntington protein damages the normal functioning of neurons in many ways, including interfering with their transport networks and gene regulation. This causes them to malfunction and die prematurely, resulting in the symptoms of Huntington's. Huntington's is increasingly recognized as a disease of the whole brain and body. Areas of the brain responsible for cognition, personality, and movement are particularly affected, leading to the classic triad of symptoms in Huntington's disease. While research is ongoing, there is currently no treatment that can slow, stop, or reverse disease progression in Huntington's. The goals of current disease management focus on providing symptom relief, maximizing function, and optimizing quality of life. It's because of my family and Huntington's families around the world that I and other scientists continue to work to progress Huntington's disease research. It is a huge collaborative effort between researchers and family members that will bring about a new chapter in this fight against Huntington's disease.
Okay, so yeah, that was just like a quick overview. If you're in LS7A right now, you might have recognized some stuff relating to your class. But yeah, now we're gonna have some members of the education committee go ahead and kind of debrief what the video talked about and go into a little bit more information about what Huntington's is.
Okay, so Huntington's disease symptoms can develop at any time, but they often first appear when people are in their 30s or 40s. Right now, there are 41,000 people diagnosed with Huntington's disease in the US. After Huntington's disease starts, a person's functional abilities begin to slowly decline over time. However, the rate of disease progression and duration varies among different individuals. Usually, the time from disease emergence to death is often about 15 to 20 years. So Huntington's disease is caused by an inherited defect in a single gene, and it's an autosomal dominant disorder, which means that a person needs only one copy of the defective gene to develop the disorder. A parent with the defective gene could pass along the defective copy of the gene or the healthy copy. So each child in the family has a 50% chance of inheriting the gene that causes the genetic disorder. Next slide, please. So Huntington's disease is caused by a mutation in the HTT gene, and this gene gives instructions for making a protein called huntingtin. The HTT gene mutation that causes Huntington's involves a DNA segment known as a CAG trinucleotide repeat. This segment is made up of 3 DNA building blocks that repeat multiple times in a row. The CAG segment in a normal HTT gene repeats about 10 to 35 times, but in people with Huntington's disease, it may repeat from 36 to over 120 times. People with around 36 to 39 CAG repeats may or may not develop Huntington's, but people with 40 or more repeats almost always develop Huntington's. An increase in the size of the CAG segment leads to the production of an abnormally long version of the huntingtin protein. The elongated protein is cut into smaller toxic fragments that bind together and accumulate in neurons, disrupting the normal function of these cells. The dysfunction and eventual death of neurons in certain areas of the brain underlie the signs and symptoms of Huntington's disease.
So basically, the basal ganglia is a group of nerve cell clusters called nuclei. These nuclei play a key role in movement and behavior control and are the parts of the brain most prominently affected in early HD.
Okay, so as the video mentioned, the symptoms of Huntington's, they usually start to appear around when people are in their 30s or 40s, but they can happen either earlier or later. And the symptoms can be categorized into 3 different groups: cognitive, behavioral, and movement. So cognitive symptoms, this has to do with the way people think. So that includes being unable to multitask, or not being able to process thoughts quickly, not being able to maintain focus. And behavioral symptoms, those usually have to do with like sudden changes in behavior. So like visible sadness or irritability or disruptive sleep patterns. So maybe one day they're not able to sleep all night, and then the next day they're sleeping too much, and it's just this continuous pattern that they're unable to break. And with the symptoms of Huntington's comes social withdrawal. So all these changes are happening either to their body or their behavior, and they're just not able to possibly like share what's happening with them to other people, or they just don't want to talk about it. So with that comes the risk of self-harm. And one important thing to note is that last week we talked about Parkinson's disease and how that causes like stunted or decreased movements. Well, Huntington's is kind of like the opposite because it leads to more involuntary movements. So like tremors, difficulty with speech and swallowing, and also muscle problems like the muscles becoming rigid or contracting too much. And seizures are also common as well. And one thing to note is that there is medication to help manage these symptoms, but there really is no like definite treatment to prevent the physical, mental, and behavioral decline associated with the condition. And if you just look at these symptoms, a lot of them, like the behavioral and thinking cognitive symptoms, they are quite similar to like maybe someone just feeling sad or just being stressed. So that it's important that when you start experiencing this on a more regular, like severe basis, to go and talk to your doctor, because you won't know if something is wrong with you unless you go out and try and like your doctor is able to diagnose you.
All right, so Huntington's disease is inherited in an autosomal dominant manner, which means that just one dominant allele is enough for an individual to become affected. And so if one parent in a couple has the disease, there's a 50% chance for each of the children to develop the disease as well, since dominant alleles are expressed even in the presence of a recessive allele. Although it's rare, it's possible for Huntington's disease to be developed through a spontaneous mutation in the HTT gene, which means without inheritance. And also, as the CAG trinucleotide repeat is passed down through generations, it often increases in size. And this is significant because having more CAG trinucleotide repeats means that the disease is more likely to have an early onset of symptoms, and also that the disease is increasingly likely to be more serious for future offspring that inherit the mutation.
All right, so considering what we've learned so far about the symptoms of Huntington's, we will now move into the medications that are available. So as we saw in the video previously, scientists have yet to develop a cure for Huntington's disease or stop its progression, but there are treatments available that may help patients manage their symptoms. So some of the medications that are available are antidepressants, which would treat patients' depression, and there's also antipsychotic medications such as Risperdal and Thorazine, which would help manage psychiatric symptoms like agitation, mood disorders, or impaired quality of judgment. And there's also a medication called tetrabenazine, which would suppress involuntary movements. But it's important to note that these medications may cause side effects such as worsening depression. And there is also another form of treatment called physical therapy, and this would help maintain mobility and build coordination and control of larger bodily motions, such as walking, standing, lying down. And with physical therapy, there is a focus on adaptive improvement, in which patients are learning new ways to accomplish day-to-day tasks. And there's also a form of there's also speech therapy, which would help with patients' physical difficulties in mouth and throat muscles. Next slide, please. So there is no cure for Huntington's disease, but you can treat it with understanding. And essentially, medicines that we talked about before can help manage the symptoms, but cannot slow down or stop the disease. But we can turn towards gaining the knowledge to better understand, sympathize, and care for patients with Huntington's disease. And with a combination of help from people who care and the courage of those living with the disease, there will be answers. Next slide.
Okay, so we're gonna watch a quick video that basically shows like a patient example of someone with Huntington's, and he kind of describes the difficulties that he experiences on a day-to-day basis, and the physician kind of looks at the symptoms that he's experiencing and kind of breaks them down.
Well, brother, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. Now, brother has a form of chorea. So when looking at someone with an abnormal movement, you look for fine things such as tremor, physiological, which is we all have. Then it can move on to an endocrine tremor, such as thyrotoxicosis. It can be alcohol-related or alcohol withdrawal, other drugs. And then you move on to athetoid movements, which are more writhing movements. And you'll see with brother, the longer you observe someone, the more information you get. So sometimes silence is better than speaking all the time. With brother, he presented, what age were you, brother, when you first got abnormal movements?
About 50.
50. And is it rude to ask what age you are now?
64.
64. And
1995.
oh, I see. Okay. And did you have anybody in your family was affected by this?
Yes, the whole family.
The whole family were affected. Okay, so what age did you say you were when it started?
50.
50. 50. And that was the first time you noticed. And what's the first thing you noticed?
I was swimming on the ground and falling.
Falling
and dropping things.
And dropping things. So falling, dropping things. And what was the first one? Shivering, was it? Shivering.
Or dribbling.
Dribbling. Sorry, dribbling.
Or dribbling.
Sorry. Okay. Now, sometimes people with Huntington's have abnormal movements all the time. Sometimes they're less pronounced. And you have to watch closely to see this flexion extension of brother's back. He grinds his teeth quite a lot to try and overcome the orofacial chorea. Now, can you look at my finger here, please, and look up, and look down, and look right, and look left, all the way over to the door. That way. And to your right, head still. Well done. Left, right. I'm holding his head. Up high, look up high, and look down low. And there's a limitation as the condition goes on of eye movements. It's difficult enough to demonstrate, but abnormalities of saccadic eye movements or indeed progressive reduction in the range of eye movements can occur. Now, the other thing that people notice is, can you open your mouth wide, brother, and stick out your tongue straight? Keep it out. Keep it out. Keep it out all the time. Don't let it back in. Come on. Keep it out as long as you can. But let's count to 3. Go. 1. 1. 1. Okay. And there's a difficulty with sustaining a movement. So as we see here with the right hand, if you don't mind, can you put your hand out straight in front of you, just your right for the moment, and close your eyes. Keep them there, and I want your eyes closed all the time. So hand out again. I'll kind of half support it here. Keep it there. And you can see the slightly writhing movements. Eyes closed when you can. I'm here now. Don't hurt yourself. Okay, now we try the left hand. If you put the hand out there, hold it there. Close your eyes, please. So they're quasi-purposeful is the phrase that people use as if they're on-purpose movements. And they're generalized, affecting head to toe, generally the limbs more so than the head and neck. But in brother's case, it is affecting head and neck. It's affecting his speech. Is your swallow affected?
Yes.
It is.
Very much so. I have to say things very slow.
You have to liquidize them. Do you have to liquidize them? You do have to. Okay. Huntington's disease.
Is the sign. Is on.
Oh, I see. Okay. So Huntington's disease, that's one of the first signs for you.
Or no, for me it was dripping on the ground.
It was
Dripping.
dripping on the ground. Dripping on the ground.
I went up out of interest to be to have a blood test.
So you had the test because your family were affected?
Yes.
And then you were told that you had the trinucleotide repeat, the triplet repeat.
Yeah.
You're probably well read on this yourself, so it's not jargon to you. Okay, well that's fine. One last thing though, can you just try the hands again? I just want to see if I can accentuate it and close your eyes. I might cover your eyes, brother, because I know you have trouble keeping your eyes closed. If you don't mind, just hold it for a moment as best you can. If it's too much, let me know. Okay, that's fine, that's fine. Thank you very much. That's great. Well, brother, just look at me for a second. And can you just touch me with your right hand? That's fine. And I just want you to touch your nose with that finger. My finger? Touch my finger. Touch your nose. Touch your finger. Okay. That's fine. You're comfortable enough there? Good, good, good. And with your left hand, can you lift that up in the air and just hold it there? And touch your nose with your index finger of the left hand, sorry. Yeah, that's great. Maybe with your left foot. Can you lift it up like that? With your right foot, okay. And your left? Did you hurt yourself? No. No, okay. And can you cock up your foot like this? Look, just cock it up. That's it. And the other one? The left? This one. Cock it up and relax them. Just hold it there.
Okay, so this is like a really quick overview. So as you can see, it's pretty difficult for people with Huntington's to sustain movement and things like that. So like the seemingly easy everyday things that we do, like eating like cereal or like drinking out like water out of a cup or something, can get really difficult for people with Huntington's, and that causes them to lose a lot of independence. So it can be like a very debilitating disease, and definitely something that we need to look into a lot more, which kind of transitions us into our next segment, which is going to be ongoing research.
Yeah, so one piece of ongoing research going on in the world is at the University of College London, and right now they're working on a pharmaceutical drug. And so the goal of the pharmaceutical treatment is to lower the levels of the mutant protein in the brain. And the drug itself is an oligonucleotide that inhibits the HTT messenger RNA, which stops the protein's translation from occurring. And as a result, less mutant protein is produced and the concentrations are reduced in the CSF and brain tissue. In the original study, the patient size was around 50 patients and the treatment was shown to be dose dependent. So higher doses led to better results. And they know that the drug has led to low levels of the protein in the CSF, which indicates that there are lower levels in the CNS tissue. They have not directly proved that, so they're in the process of fully determining that. So in future studies, they'll be working on determining whether or not brain tissue levels have also decreased. The paper was published in May 2019, and the study itself has been ongoing since. The research team are now in phase 3 of clinical trials, which indicates that they have had very good success in reducing expression in patients. And one more thing about the neurologist, Dr. Tabrizi, she is a neuroscientist who's done most of her work in neurodegeneration, and she is currently the director of UCL's Huntington's Disease Center, which she co-founded in 2016.
All right, thank you, Artie, for spotlighting some of the research being done globally. In terms of current research being done here at UCLA, I would like to give some examples of research being done to find factors that contribute to HD as well as possible treatment targets for patients. So first off, for basic research, just last year, Dr. Baljeet Kak and his lab released findings related to the role of astrocytes in Huntington's disease, astrocytes being one of the supportive glial cells in the central nervous system. And so what his group found was that suppressing the Huntington's disease mutation in astrocytes actually slowed disease progression and even repaired some damage. And so this work was important because it was actually one of the first studies to focus specifically on how the mutation in astrocytes could contribute to Huntington's disease. And so on the right, you can see that the green stain marks the presence of the mutant Huntington protein in the purple stained astrocytes. Second, another UCLA research team headed by Dr. X. William Yang has also focused on studying how Huntington spreads and shows symptoms in the brain. And so specifically, their work focuses on finding genetic and molecular targets for therapies and how turning on or off certain mechanisms can reduce the effects and transmission of HD in the brain. Additionally, they are also working on creating large-scale models of how neurons interact in the basal ganglia to understand dysfunction in Huntington's patients. And so on the right, you can see a stained image of a transgenic mouse brain from the lab with the different parts, including the basal ganglia, which is highlighted in pink. And then lastly, in terms of clinical research, UCLA is also home to the Huntington's Disease Society of America Center of Excellence, in which physicians and researchers work on testing treatments and performing clinical research on patients with the hopes of finding effective therapies for Huntington's.
Okay, so our podcast team, as part of the education committee, has come up with some questions that we can discuss in breakout rooms relating to Huntington's disease. And what we're going to do is we are going to split up into several breakout rooms. And if your breakout room is like an even number, then you'll be discussing question 2. And if your breakout room is an odd number, you'll be discussing question 1. So question 1 is, obviously, quality of life for a person suffering from Huntington's disease is very low. How do you decide when it's time to resort to more risky measures in order to possibly extend their lifespan? Considering life expectancy is low for an individual with this disorder, should quality of life be prioritized or should other options be exhausted first? And we'll probably send these in the chat as well so that you can have them when you're discussing. And then the next question is going to be Proposition 14, just passed in California, increasing state funding for stem cell research. Discuss how current stem cell treatment clinical trials and studies are impacted, and more specifically, based on what you've just learned, do you believe that this will have a great effect on Huntington's research? So we will make breakout rooms now. I'm going to stop share.
All right, I think we're waiting on 2 more groups. Okay, I think we should be good. Okay. Well, does anyone in the odd groups, let's get like 2 or 3 representatives, and I guess if you want, feel free to share what your group discussed. Or you can type in the chat, whatever works.
Just to get the go ahead.
Sorry, no, you go. You go.
One thing that my group discussed was just making sure that the patient is prioritized in terms of resorting to different measures, and just whatever happens, making sure the patient is the one making those decisions, at least when they are able to give consent. And then from there, kind of deciding whether or not to resort to more risky measures, or extending lifespan, or focusing on quality of life.
Awesome. Right. Max, were you gonna share something?
Yeah, we also talked about like it's very variable. So like there's so many different factors that come into this. So like the severity of Huntington's disease. So like how much it's affecting your daily life. So I know that like in a previous class that I took, there's like activities of daily life, and then instrumental activities of daily life. And I think that the ADL talks about like your kind of basic action. So like getting out of bed, or like getting dressed, like those kind of basics, right? And if it's impeding on what you kind of need to do every single day, then maybe it is time to resort to like a more invasive approach that might have like a better results than a non-invasive approach. But then there's also things such as like how financially supported the patient is, and how much money they are willing to ultimately give into treatment options. And if they want to if they want to go through every single different type of treatment and then go into invasive, they can do that. Or if they can only do one sort of treatment. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I guess moving on to stem cell research for question 2. With Prop 14, I know I spoke with a couple groups on this. Anyone want to share their opinions?
Our group talked about how we could use stem cell treatment to inject them when they're young, because you can identify the gene type when they're younger, and hopefully it can grow to replace the potentially destroyed, anyways, infected, whatever, neurons, and that could be like neurogenerative.
Definitely, yeah. Anyone else share that opinion, Daniel?
Yeah, similarly, our group talked about like once you do start showing symptoms and your neurons are actually being affected and damaged, our group talked about using stem cell therapies to like rebuild your neurons or like get new neurons, rather than like you can't really rebuild the ones that are damaged, but like get a new stock basically.
For sure. Thanks, Hugo. I think I heard one more person.
Yeah, I think kind of looking at another aspect of the proposition passing, due to an increasing state funding for stem cell research, I feel like we'll see a relative short-term explosion of new Huntington data due to previously, before Prop 14, the primary with stem cell research, since a lot of it was private funding, and private funding really tends to focus on the diseases that take up the media circle, have the most quote unquote buzzwords in it. And those tend to be things like cancer, Parkinson's, things like that. And Huntington was kind of excluded from that conversation. So with state funding increasing, more equitable research, I feel like we'll definitely see more research being done in Huntington's compared to the prior to the proposition passing.
Thanks for sharing. Anyone else before we move on to our second discussion? All right, let's move on to questions 3 and 4. And I've mixed up your breakout rooms again, so you get to know more members. But here we go.
Okay. So question 3, again, I don't know if this was super clear last time, but if you're in odd breakout rooms, you can do like the odd number question. So like this time would be 3. And then if you're in an even breakout room, you can do question 4. So
question 3, patients with Huntington's burn more calories due to the increased body movement. Also, many have difficulty eating. Discuss creative approaches to solving the nutritional related difficulties facing those affected by Huntington's. So did anyone come up with any creative approaches?
I know okay, yeah. So I know like our group was like discussing like kind of like a two-pronged approach to this, depending on when the diagnosis for Huntington's is given. If it's caught early on before the majority of symptoms start to manifest, kind of preventative approach could be taken, like adopting a bodybuilder, powerlifter sort of diet scheme would be useful, because they have similar characteristics in burning more calories than the average population, but also limited methods and time to eat. So that could be adapted and create a lifestyle change. But after that, if it's caught when symptoms start to like show up, there might need to be some form of neurotech approach taken in order to like stabilize their head and increase their muscle function in their throat to enable swallowing.
Yeah, those are really, really great points. Nari, I think you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, my group and I were talking about this company called Liftware Level that basically has like computerized silverware. So it helps people with mobility issues by kind of stabilizing the silverware for them when they're eating. So I feel like that would help with the difficulty eating portion, because it would make it easier for them to eat like the same way that everybody else does.
I never heard of that before. That's actually really interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. Does anyone have any other comments on question 3 before we move to question 4? Okay, I think we're good to go to question 4 here. So with how Huntington's disease originates from mistakes within the DNA, gene therapy or pharmaceuticals are definitely feasible solutions. What methods might you propose in order to solve the unnecessary repetition? And are there any practical or ethical issues with gene therapy treatment?
Yeah, so my group talked about the possibility of using CRISPR as a gene therapy to snip out the unnecessary CAG codon. And we're also talking about practical issues where the technology might not be so developed as of right now, and it might be too expensive to utilize at a large scale. And also some ethical issues are that there are a lot of people in the world that are against altering genes, and the technology to alter genes can be used for not for the benefit of to benefit people in need and for selfish needs. So that might be a problem.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Really great points there. Does anyone have anything they would like to add?
Our group was talking about how we could that there's a possibility of creating a medication that would be able to get rid of the repeating CAG codon. However, we definitely saw a big practical issue with this. We also discussed CRISPR initially, but the practical issue we saw with targeting a specific amino acid was that CAG is not specific to the Huntington protein. So any type of non-invasive medication that would need to be created would need to be very specific to the Huntington CAG codon specifically. Otherwise, it could lead to like the denaturation of proteins that contain CAG that are vital to other bodily functions.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sasha. Really great points made by everyone. I think this is it for our breakout room. So thank you guys for all going into them and for all giving all your opinions. And we'll have Tiffany finish with any comments.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys for your great discussion today. Let me go ahead